This is our panel discussion as part of Arts Month all through October. We're doing a series of virtual sessions devoted to artists and arts organizations to help them acquire whatever funding they may need and to work the best that they possibly can. We are going to be talking today with representatives from the New York Foundation for the Arts, Americans for the Arts, and the Emily Hall Tremaine Foundation. On the back end here, our Candid staffers who will be supporting the webinar. First, there's me. My name is Tracy Kaufman. I am program manager at Candid, and I will be loosely moderating today's discussion. Also supporting this webinar, we have Dave Holmes and Elizabeth Zavada, both also programs managers at Candid today. A little bit about Candid for the uninitiated. Candid was created out of the marriage of Foundation Center and GuideStar at the beginning of last year. Some of you may know our two legacy organizations. Foundation Center had been around since 1956 and has long been the #1 source of data and information on grants and foundations worldwide. And GuideStar has long been the #1 source of data on the nonprofit sector. On February 1st, 2019, Foundation Center and GuideStar became one organization, now known as Candid. Why do we exist as an organization? Every year, millions of nonprofits spend trillions of dollars around the world. Candid finds out where all of that money comes from, where all of that money goes, and why it matters. Together, we all do a ton of research all about the nonprofit and social sector. We collaborate with a lot of partner organizations worldwide, and we provide lots and lots of training to social sector professionals everywhere. We aim to connect the people who want to change the world to the resources they need to do it. A little bit about our response to a lot of the current events going on these days. Throughout the pandemic, throughout COVID-19, we have converted all of our training that we do to an online virtual format, much like the one that you're attending today. If you want to see what else we have on the schedule, you can follow that bit.ly link you see on your screen to Candid Learning Online and see what other sorts of trainings we have coming up. And if you're interested in more arts-related trainings, we have more of those coming up this month as well. And I'll share a little bit more about a couple of those towards the end of today's session. Also, if you want to learn more about Foundation's response to the pandemic, to COVID-19, we have a free resource online about the Foundation response to COVID. There's over $16 billion that have gone out in response to COVID so far this year, and that number keeps going up, 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 and we have been tracking which foundations have been responding, who they've been giving money to, and everything else you need to know about it. We've also been tracking a lot about Foundation response to racial equity. Last I saw, I think there's over $11 billion that has been given out in response to racial equity related issues, and we have a lot of great research and information available on that site as well. If you want to connect with us, you can always sign up for our newsletter and get the latest on what we have going on in terms of research, training, or what have you. You can sign up for the Candid Learning newsletter anytime or follow us on social media if you are so inclined. Without further ado, let's begin. So today we will be talking about how to find funding, resources, and support for individual artists, which is slightly a different beast from finding support as an arts organization. Our panel today, I'm really happy to have with us today, Gabriela Calandro, the Director of NYFA Grants and Curatorial Affairs at New York Foundation for the Arts. We have Heather Pontonio, Senior Program Director at the Emily Hall Tremaine Foundation. And we have Ruby Lopez Harper, Senior Director of Local Arts Advancement at Americans for the Arts. Wonderful panelists that we have with us today. And I'd love to thank them very much for their participation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can begin our conversation today. Thank you so much to our wonderful panelists for joining us in this discussion today. So why are we here today? We periodically will run a panel session as part of Arts Month all about what funding looks like for individual artists. This year, I think, is a little bit special. Maybe not the good kind of special, but this year is unique in that artists have been deeply affected by the COVID-19 crisis, and many artists have lost income and have had to seek out modified ways of working as well. So we're going to discuss both the creative and financial impacts of COVID this year and talk about various emergency grants and other resources and services that might be available for artists this year. So I'd like to begin by asking each of our panelists to maybe introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your organization and talk about what is your organization's relationship to individual artists specifically. I'd like to start with, I think, Gabriella, New York Foundation for the Arts. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Tracy, and thank you, Candid, for putting on this important session today to talk specifically about individual artists, because like Tracy just mentioned, a lot of artists have been affected most recently by the pandemic. So my name is Gabriella Calandra. I'm the Director of Grants and Curatorial Affairs at the New York Foundation for the Arts, based in New York City. I'm calling in actually from Australia today though. So the New York Foundation for the Arts is an organization that was established in 1971 to support artists at critical stages of their creative lives. And we do that through a range of different programs. We have a learning department which really focuses on professional development for artists. We do that through one-on-one sessions, but we also do have group sessions that last for a weekend or over a long period of time. Since we've all gone remote back in March, all of those programs are still running and they're running online. Prior to the pandemic, NYFA had already established an online learning program. So that has just become more robust as we move into this new way of connecting and learning and being creative. We have a fiscal sponsorship department which works with artists and arts groups to seek funding for arts projects, which is great. And we have many active projects for both individual artists, but also artists groups. We have an online program, so we have resources for artists. We have a very robust arts classifieds board, so a job board, which hopefully many of you have interacted with over the years. We have NYFA Source, which is opportunities for artists and arts workers to connect on a range of different levels, whether it be finding space or finding resources that they need. We also have a emergency resources page, which over the years has developed and during the pandemic has become, a great focal point for us to actually focus and give resources to artists directly. So that's a combination of arts grants and resources across the country for artists, and it's continuously updated. So do have a look at that site for a range of different resources across the arts industry. We also have an awards and grants department, which is where I sit in. We give primarily grants to individual artists to keep on creating. We do have a few project grants, but mostly we have grants that focus on supporting individual artists to keep on creating. So they're not project grants, they're not funding for a specific project, but they're there primarily to support artists, to keep on creating. So one of our most recognized funds is the NYFA Artist Fellowship, where we give $7,000 of unrestricted cash grants to artists. And we have another, really great program which was established back in March, which is the Rauschenberg Emergency Medical Grant. So this is an opportunity for artists across the country to apply if they've had unexpected medical emergencies. So they're able to apply for up to $5,000 to get those medical emergency bills paid. So jump onto our website. That's the grant that we currently have open for artists. So do have a look at that if you fall into that unexpected medical emergency. It's all anonymous, and that's a really great resource, and we're really proud to be partnering with the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation to make that happen.
Great. A quick clarification question from the chat. We've gotten an attendee wondering, is NIFA still only for New York residents?
No. So we, started as a foundation that supported New York State residents, but we are very much a national organization now. We do have, obviously, there are some funds that are specifically for New York State residents, and one of them is the NISCA NIFA Artist Fellowship. But during this time of, resources for the pandemic and specifically for COVID-19, a lot of our grants that we've had for individual artists have been on a national level or beyond the New York State border. So we're very, it's been a really great thing for NIFA to be able to support artists in this way throughout this time, while also running our usual programs. We've had a lot of programs that are specifically to help artists either talk to one another one-on-one or have an opportunity to apply for some support through emergency grants. So not just New York State, definitely a national programs across all of our programming, learning, fiscal sponsorship, and grants.
Great, thank you so much. That's really helpful. Next, let's go to Heather. If you'd like to talk a little bit about, maybe introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about the Tremaine Foundation and what the Tremaine Foundation's relationship to individual artists specifically is.
Perfect. Hello all. Thank you for being here today, and thanks to Candid for putting this together. My name is Heather Pontonio. I am the Senior Program Director with the Emily Hall Tremaine Foundation. We are a private family foundation based in Connecticut, but we fund all across the country. The Family Foundation has 3 focus areas. One is environment, one is learning differences, and I focus on the art program. Within art, we fund contemporary art curators and artists through support to organizations who work with artists. So the bulk of my work relates to engaging with arts organizations across the country from all levels, from local organizations, from individual nonprofits to state arts agencies and national initiatives, all around professional development for artists, encouraging them to have the skill sets they need and often did not get during their college or previously learning in order to have a career as an artist. So we started this funding 20 years ago. So go back in time before 2000, there was very little. There's about 5 programs in the entire country that focused on professional development. Today, we know that there's over 150 programs around the country. So there's a lot of opportunity now that exists for training. We as an organization really believe in convening and bringing people together. And so from early on with our grants, we convened those administrators to talk and learn from each other around what do artists need and how do we best support that work. And that has led us through a journey with them and a lot of learning and the creation of Artists Thrive, which is a separate initiative. You can go to artistthrive.org and see it. That's a self-assessment tool that was created by the organizations and artists all across the country, thinking holistically about what it is that artists need to thrive. So there's 2 self-assessment surveys. One asks you if you're an artist, the other one is if you work with artists, and it gives you a chance to do some reflective self-assessment thinking and start a conversation around what are the barriers or what are the things that have to shift in order for you as an artist or your work as artists to thrive. So that's the core of the work we do. We, through that work and through our work with our grantees, convene regularly and try to discover what ways and gaps there are in the field for support for artists. So that's really briefly what we do at the Tremaine Foundation.
Wonderful, thanks so much. All right, and now let's move to Ruby over at Americans for the Arts. You want to just introduce yourself, talk about Americans for the Arts and what they have to offer for individual artists?
Yeah, thank you. I want to also add my thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to share information. I am Ruby Lopez Harper, Senior Director of Local Arts Advancement with Americans for the Arts. And Americans for the Arts, for those of you who are not familiar with us, is the leading national service organization for arts and culture around the country. Our two primary areas that we work is advocacy and programs and services. And within programs and services is where the bulk of the work is that I engage with in relation to providing resources for local communities to be able to provide access at its optimum for the individuals who reside in their community. So I work with 4,500 local arts agencies around the country. We provide field research, we provide education, network support, so peer interactions, and we do a lot of trend. There's an annual, multiple surveys and research happening at any given moment that is really important, especially now, to tell the story of what is happening to the sector as we continue to move through the pandemic. So we do have a resource center that is available to anyone in the field, individual and organization. It is segmented in that way, so it's easy to find the information that is most important to you. And we'll drop the link in a second. But within the resource center, we have information to support individual artists as they are navigating this time. So we have relief funds that are available. They're organized in a geographic fashion, so by state, and then alphabetical. So hopefully that makes it easy. We try to include information as far as grant amount, eligibility, restrictions and the due date. And we do scrub that list on a weekly basis to make sure that the information there is as current as possible. We also have information there related to federal relief programs as they continue to exist, not exist, run out, get refreshed. We have a great primer series through our digital learning platform that is free about all of the different federal programs. And then we also have a Ask the Expert office hours every Friday with Nina Oslu-Tunchili with our Arts Action Fund that also provides custom and one-on-one consultation that has been super helpful to the individuals. I've sat on the calls with her a number of times, I should say, a couple of times maybe in the beginning. And it's just always fascinating to understand the gaps in infrastructure and knowledge and just expertise. So we are so excited to be able to provide that support and help as many artists as possible gain access to those programs. Some of the other work that we do is around activation. So we have a suite of educational programs around supporting individual artists that reflects or focuses on the arts administrators within institutions that are charged with that work to ensure that they are thinking holistically about their role and their possibilities in supporting individuals in their community. And then we also couple that with work that Heather's been doing through the Tremaine Foundation on Artists Thrive and using that as a compass point to help folks find themselves and aspire to improve the way that they support individual artists. We also have an educational program, Artists at the Community Development Table, which supports local arts agencies in activating individual artists into community development work. And what does that mean? And how best to do that so that they're thoughtful of the whole process. And then currently we're also pushing a very grand and large initiative called Getting Creative Workers Working Again, and focusing on ensuring that that is available to the two political parties right now around what is possible as we continue to navigate nationally the pandemic and its impact on the creative economy. And so I can also share that link if you're interested in reviewing the policy proposal and signing on as an organization to support that would also be helpful and interesting. And I think I'm going to stop there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Just a reminder to everyone, keep on putting any questions you have for the panelists into the chat, and we'll do our best to get to as many as possible. I'd actually like to run a few quick audience polls before we go further to get a clearer sense of who we have in the space today. The first poll, just to get an idea, if you are an artist, have you received grants this year? Just give you just a moment. Have you tried but failed to receive any? Are you haven't received any yet, but you're actively applying? Or if you have some other sort of scenario going on, then please be sure to put it in the chat.
I'll give everyone just another moment. We're inching up to 60% participation. So if you haven't voted just yet, I'll give you one more sec.
Wonderful.
All right, and with that, we're at 62% of the room participating in our poll, so I'll close it now.
Okay, you want to share those results? Okay, 59% have not gotten arts grants this year, and just 11% have been successful, and 15% are actively applying right now. Anyone who chose other, if you want to explain anything in the chat, please feel free. All right, that is helpful. And I believe we have a couple more polls. Elizabeth, if you'd like to run the second poll. All right, just to get a sense, how many of you are individual artists yourself versus do you work for an arts organization, or are you here in both capacities? You're an artist and you also work for an arts organization. All right, just over half the room, 55%, are individual artists, and a decent percentage of you are both. You're an artist and you work for an arts organization. All right, this is helpful. So we mainly have individual artists in the room here. And I think we have one more poll, just to get a sense of what field of the arts we have represented primarily. So if you'd like to just let us know what field you work in, this will also be helpful for all of us. Going once, going twice. All right, yes, here we go. We've got roughly half the room are visual artists, just under half are performing artists. We've got a couple of filmmakers, a couple of writers, over a third of the room, multidisciplinary. All right, this is great to know. Usually we have a higher percentage of people in the performing arts in a lot of our arts related programs, so it's really interesting having so many visual artists with us today. All right. Thank you, Elizabeth, for running those polls, and thank you everyone for taking our polls today. All right, so let's keep going with our discussion. I'd like to throw a question out to the panel. Whoever would like to pipe up initially, feel free. So from what you've been seeing this year, how severe has the impact of COVID been this year on artists' ability to work and their ability to support themselves? And to what extent is that the same question versus different questions? Ability to do their work versus to support themselves.
I'll jump in. I think that, you know, like everyone in March was really thrust into a situation where, you know, many of us thought we'd probably be away from the office for, you know, a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months, not that it would be, you know, this long. And I think that that uncertainty at that time, you know, has obviously snowballed, and it has, you know, had an impact on artists, arts workers, workers in general, and obviously the nation and on a globe, and the globe as well. You know, I think just that poll that we saw before about artists who have applied for funding and didn't receive it just shows in this small snapshot of, you know, artists that are in need right now. You know, prior to this pandemic, you know, we connected in a way that was very different. We were going to see shows, artists were connecting, creating works together, and all of a sudden that was taken away. And so, you know, I think that they both go hand in hand, creating, being able to show work, being able to connect, and it really, you know, has had a huge impact. And there are organizations, you know, as NIFA as well, you know, really kind of was, you know, shell shocked like everybody else, and, you know, starting to create programs and like hearing the conversations that were happening, artists reaching out, so adapting our programming to really fit with that. And you know, as you were mentioning earlier, Tracy, like even Candid, like really shifting their programming online. We've done that as well. So I think, you know, it's not something that, you know, there are, you know, programs out there measuring it, and I think it's going to be a while for us to really see the true impact. Because this is something that's not, you know, now not going to just be something at the end of the year, but will have a continued effect as we go back into being whatever the next stage looks like. So yeah, it's a really interesting space, and yeah.
Great. Ruby or Heather, anything to add?
You know, I think for me, you know, it's always a numbers game. I think, as Gabriella said, you know, none of us were prepared for what's happening, and artists and creatives have been amongst the most severely affected. I think I need more coffee. And so we've been tracking, as I said, we have a number of different surveys that have been deployed, and I always feel like I come into these conversations as a bit of an angel of doom. Because the numbers are sobering and can be really depressing. But I think in that, you know, even there's an opportunity to learn either where we need to fill the gap, where we need to be focusing, but also that there's just so much generosity happening, right? So even though we know, you know, 95% of the over 26,000 surveys that we've received on the impact on creative workers and artists, you know, 95% of them have reported loss of income. You know, 67% are unable to access the things that they need for their creative work. And, you know, 78% have no post-pandemic financial recovery plan. And so while I think we've really spent a lot of time, you know, in this moment, worrying about this moment, our long-term view has to come into focus soon, because we have already outlived the projections and the ideas that we had. You know, I think even in March, you know, those of us who are, you know, one of the things I didn't talk about is like disaster is also a hat I wear at the office. And, you know, I was chatting with disaster folks back in March, and we thought we'd be on the other side of this, you know, July. And here we are, it's October. And we're already hearing about, you know, cancellations into summer of next year. So at some point, things are going to give. And I think as the floodwaters recede, if you will, you know, we need to be prepared for what that's going to look like. And I've been working with a number of folks around, you know, what is the exit strategy for folks, and how do we start destigmatizing those conversations? How do we start highlighting and spotlighting resources and alternative pathways that individuals and organizations can activate in order to prepare themselves for a reemergence, for a hiatus, for a phoenix rising rising from the ashes moment, because I think that's the next thing. And it's taken, you know, everybody's moving so kind of cyclically through this, because none of us are having it all happening at the same time. You know, points of entry matter in this moment, and the early affected areas are already showing us glimmers of what the path can be for the rest of the country. You know, even just this morning with last night, I was reading an article about San Francisco. The city of San Francisco is announced that they're going to do $1,000 a month for artists. But, you know, the unexpected consequence of that is now they have to define who's an artist. They're projecting it'll only support 130 people. And, you know, it's just not enough.
I saw that report just today, along with something in the New York Times that says that 8 million people have slipped into poverty since May, as all the money from the CARES Act has run out. And like, we're talking about artists, but all of this affects everyone everywhere, and how much overlap there is. And that whole thing about flying a plane while building it that people often talk about, like how that becomes truer than ever and trickier than ever as people try to plan for what their futures are going to look like, when we don't even know when exactly the current crisis is going to end, whether it will be soon, not so soon, who can say. Just to keep going on the COVID subject, if any of you can share about any special initiatives that you have going on right now to support artists during the pandemic, and to what extent some of that support is financial versus other non-financial services that you have available that would be helpful for artists right now during COVID.
Riola, do you want to start, since NYFA has a few programs?
Yeah, sure. So at the moment, in regards to funding and grants, money going to artists specifically, we don't have any current COVID related grants. There is a couple in the pipeline, but nothing open currently. I'll say this a couple of times, you know, subscribe to our e-news, keep an eye on our website, to, you know, keep abreast of those. But in regards to programming, our learning department has really kind of pivoted to really helping artists at this point. So there's an upcoming panel on October 23rd, which is looking at pivoting during a pandemic. So it's a panel discussion about, you know, from artists and arts workers and people within the industry about, you know, how do we change what we're, you know, the way that we're working. There is also, you know, other resources that we have. One thing that we have been really good at is kind of documenting those conversations that have already happened. So on our blog, there is a lot of like recaps and a lot of information about, you know, artists keeping well during this time, and really focusing on, you know, personal health, mental health, which is, you know, the other side of the coin, which is not spoken of, you know, that is really kind of very deep rooted in a lot of artists and a lot of workers and just the population in general. So some really great things on the website there, other conversations, and like I said, as an organization, and particularly the learning department and those who are fiscally sponsored, and the resources that we have for them, it's really about conversations right now with artists, and like sharing resources, and just having an opportunity to kind of be there for one another, as we are all separate, you know, creating spaces for our artists and constituents to come together to discuss. Yeah, it's a kind of a snapshot.
Great, thank you.
So I just posted in the chat the Artist Relief Fund, So that's one of the large funds in the country. They're planning to wrap up in December, but still ongoing right now. And I provide the links in the chat, and the next deadline is actually later this month. And they've been pretty good each month with funding across the country in a variety of different ways. So I suggest applying there. Their application is very simple, so it does not take a lot of time. I think that is one thing that you have to evaluate when you're looking at some of these, if, how long the proposal is. In some cases, it's as brief and short as it possibly can be. And I know Ruby posted the link, and there's a lot of funds that were emergency programs initially, and some of those have ended. But if they apply to you in your location, I still suggest looking, because a number of them were looking for additional funds or refreshing. And so they kind of cycle a lot of times. So even if it looks like they may be closed, I would suggest just taking a look and seeing what information you can find about where they're at. And in many cases, you can reach out and call those organizations and get an understanding, because, well, it is a network in the country, and while they may no longer be doing it, they may know another organization that applies to you that you could apply for. So it can't hurt to call. So I suggest calling.
Yeah, and I will say with our resource center, we monitor it to keep it up to date. So most of the things that are there are active and current. We've also filtered out funds that are in contribution mode, if you will, the ones that are looking for that additional funding to continue to fund, so that you're not having to also go through that and figure out, like, oh, this one's only asking for donations. This one's actually, we called it distribution phase, so that we could internally try to parse between. So the information should be pretty current and helpful that way. But I would also, suggest reaching out to your state arts agency, your local arts agency. In some cases, some of you may have county arts agencies. They will also have information about additional local funds that might be available. And I know they've also posted, I think David posted the NCAPER, the National Coalition for Arts Preparedness and Emergency Response, is also a great resource. We are part of the steering committee that drives that group. And all of the service organizations either have relief programs or have artist services. Actors Fund has a great wealth of either webinar learnings or actual programs. Some of them are national, some of them are, geographic specific, but groups like that are also there to help you navigate other resources that are more appropriate for you in your local space. So even reaching out to them to say, hey, I don't see anything listed, but do you know of anything in my area? And all of us are service oriented. So, we love to help folks make those connections, and it's part of our portfolio. So I would encourage you to also visit NCAPER, look at those additional service organizations, and reach out to them if there's something that you see that's not maybe available to you, but they may have a resource that's local.
Great, thank you. So there are some questions coming in through the chat that have a similar vein to them. One of the attendees writes, every time I apply as an individual artist for grants or funding, I'm denied because I'm not a nonprofit organization. Do I need to establish a nonprofit as part of my studio? And I know that NYFA offers fiscal sponsorship, which would also provide someone with access to 501c3 status that can open up some additional options in terms of funding. To what extent do you all think it could be necessary for someone to either start their own 501c3 nonprofit or to get a fiscal sponsor, versus how successful might they be continuing to seek grants just as an individual?
I think I might quickly talk about fiscal sponsorship, just really briefly in regards to what NYFA does for fiscal sponsors, fiscally sponsored projects. So one thing that you need to apply with to receive fiscal sponsorship through NYFA is with a project in mind. So that might be an individual artist, trying to create a project, or it might be a group of artists already coming together who are seeking to come under a 501c status so that it can apply for those larger funds. And basically that's what fiscal sponsorship does, is it helps you apply for those grants that are specifically designed to only fund 501(c)(3) status projects and artists. In regards to like individuals applying for funding, I can speak about NIFA's funding. You know, we are an organization that gives money directly to artists. A lot of organizations that we partner with come to us because we have that particular relationship and are able to do that. You know, at this time, you know, one thing that I think is actually, you know, a good thing to be doing at this time, if you aren't able to create because of space limitations, is to really think about your portfolio of work and really start this, you know, using this time to archive and to think about, you know, creating, you know, good statements about your work, maybe, you know, taking images of your work, because as someone who receives thousands of applications for funding a year, it's about having a really clear story in your application. When we're talking about, you know, not specifically for COVID, you know, emergency relief, but we're talking about arts funding in general. It's about, you know, that consistent story throughout an application, and the support material that you submit is really, really vital in the panel understanding your work. And more than ever, you know, panelists are gathering online. They're doing panel sessions via Zoom. I conducted all of our panels via Zoom this year. So it's really important that you think about the way that your work is represented online and the way that you view your work on a computer screen. So this is a good time that if you're struggling to create work, how can you be productive in the studio? How can you keep your practice going? Take the time to step back and actually evaluate what you have and start thinking about, all right, looking at the grants that are available either within your area or across the country, and really think about, well, what are they looking for and how can I put my best foot forward when they open? So I think that this is actually a really good time for artists to be thinking about that and spending some time crafting those statements, thinking about taking, you know, good quality documentation of their work, because that is what arts funders are looking at right now. And for a very, you know, for the foreseeable future, everything will be online. So we're not going to be able to visit a show. We're not going to be able to come to see your studio. So think about those sorts of things and really developing that portfolio right now.
So I'm going to answer this question in a little bit of a roundabout way, but I hit the wrong button. I am posting right now in the chat the January 2020 support for individual artists fact sheet from the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies. So this is at the state level, and essentially of all state grant dollars, only 3% went to individual artists. Okay, so this is before COVID, and it was one of those moments that it kind of started to shed light on how little funding there is for artists at a state level in the country. And so you think a lot of times the state level is actually then funded down to more local agencies, so their pool is even smaller in those funds. So just kind of putting a frame on this, when we talk about individual grant dollars, in a lot of cases those pools are really small, and inevitably the number of applicants is well beyond the number that can possibly be supported. So there's, you know, a game you're trying to play around this and figuring some things out. And so going back to the question around being a nonprofit or individual or having a fiscal agent, I think some of the question is, what is the framing on the grant? What are you applying for? Is it a project? You know, is it to support the purchase of, you know, materials or supplies that are needed? So there's a lot of lenses that you have to think about, how does this actually fall? But I think in some cases it may be wise for you to think about, are you an artist that can be contracted by an existing organization to do the project? So the organization would actually be the applicant and you would be the artist they would be paying to do that work. So that's about building a relationship too with others in your community. But in some cases, the viability of the project, the support, the community that organization might bring in might make it more viable to support, and may open other opportunities up for grant opportunities, if you think about it from a lens of who else could apply on your behalf as you being who they contract to do the work.
Yeah, the only other thing I would add is that I'm always hesitant to tell people to get a 501c3. 1, because it's time, 2, because it's money, and 3, because it doesn't always serve you in the end, because I think it fundamentally propagates a system of scarcity and drives the mentality that, you know, artists should always be there with a handout. I think there's a lot of work left to be done in the field at large around breaking down the idea of the starving artist and pushing philanthropy to think differently about the way that it supports individuals. You know, I was going to bring up, and thank you for calling that forward, Heather, the agency infrastructure at the local, county, and state level also drives from the national level, right? So the National Endowment for the Arts kind of set the pace for not funding individual artists resulting from the culture wars back in the 80s. And it's not changing anytime soon. And so even as we're seeing, you know, CARES Act money go through into local communities, filtering through the states with their allocations, you know, those restrictions still exist. And so there's, you know, even though there may be, there isn't. So let me just say that there isn't enough money to go around right now, and probably won't be for a while. But even if there was, there would still be limitations on how much could go to an individual. And so I love the suggestion that Heather makes about, you know, who can you partner with, and the suggestion and examples that Gabriella shared about fiscal sponsorship. Because when I was in Columbus doing work at the local level, working with individual artists, you know, fiscal sponsorship is a way to also test your idea without having to invest a lot of resources, and working with an organization to give you that give you that infrastructure shelter, also buys you space and time to make sure that what you're trying to accomplish is going to be sustainable. Because I have seen, you know, a lot of artists start 501c3s over the years that I've been doing this work, and, you know, they're belly up and failing a year, 2 years later. So the cautionary side of all of that.
Yeah, and another good thing of getting a fiscal sponsor is that many of them will support you as an artist in like finding funding, reading applications. That's one of the benefits that we offer our fiscally sponsored projects, is it's an actual partnership. It's not just, oh yeah, you can, you know, we'll help you filter your money. It's like, no, we're going to help you succeed, and we're going to give you the resources, and we have programming these specifically for those fiscally sponsored projects. So yeah, to Ruby's point, if you have a project that you want to test out, or you're new to, like, you know, developing large scale or, you know, medium scale projects, it's a really good opportunity to kind of test the waters and see where your strengths and your weaknesses are, and you know, get the support from established organizations.
I would add one last final piece on that is it depends on where you are in the country and what your relationships are with organizations. I've supported a number of artists in my past life through their relationship with a theater or with orchestra or someone where it was a fiscal agent relationship, but they weren't taking the fiscal agent fee. They were in that place so connected in a relationship with that individual, they were willing to work with them as their essentially fiscal agent on a project. So it all depends on your relationship in the community and where you are. But just think about it in the lens that sometimes you don't have to think about the formal fiscal agent relationship. Sometimes there is an opportunity for the network you already have to build on.
Great. Thank you all for this. I would also very much agree that collaboration, relationships, and the strengths of your networks have some of the best potential for a lifeline for you going forward in a tough time. That the more you can partner with fellow artists, fellow organizations, and keep your network strong, that can really, really help you out. And I would also agree that fiscal sponsorship would be a much better option to pursue in most cases than setting up your own 501c3. I know as a longtime librarian at Candid, every single day people walk in the door asking, how do I start a nonprofit? How do I get my own 501c3? And in some ways, like, our job is not to talk people out of starting their own 501c3 organization, but I would say our job is at least to make people stop and pause and think it through before they take such a dire step. If you think about the fact that that old thing people say about when people start businesses, the average small business fails within 2 years. It's not that different for nonprofits. It's a huge ordeal to set up your own entire 501c3 organization. It's like starting a business, and it needs a business plan. It needs sustainability. And I would strongly pause before setting up your own 501c3. But fiscal sponsorship is great in that it gives you a lot of flexibility. It lets you be like an organization when you need to be like an organization, and it lets you be like a regular person when you need to be like a regular person, and there's not that same level of risk involved. I know NIFA offers fiscal sponsorship as a service. Lots of other organizations offer fiscal sponsorship as a service as well. It's definitely something to explore if you're looking to kind of open up your options of funding possibilities here. So anyway, as we're talking about networks, getting connected, things like that, I saw a question in the chat here. Many individual artist grants seem to be by nomination only. Do you have any idea how these nominations are decided upon? Anyone got an answer for this one?
I would say you need to contact that organization and ask, because there is no one standard way. And it should be transparent as where nominations come from. It shouldn't be something that's completely behind the curtain. So ask.
And I will say this just to, I think, also interpret a little bit of the coded language that we use in the, I should say, have used in my former funding life. You know, by nomination only means that it's who you know within their network and structure. It's, you know, their way of saying, we're not going to take unsolicited requests, so please don't reach out to us. It's also their way of saying, we don't have an open and transparent process. We probably just fund the people that we like or the people that we get to know. And so when I used to do searches with individuals of the Foundation Center Library for funding opportunities. And the local library had a subscription at the time. I don't know if they still do. I don't live in Columbus anymore, but there was a subscription through the local library. You could go to the site, go on site and use one of their computers to access the full database. And so one of the services that we provided through the local arts agency, and not everyone does, was work with individuals to say, okay, what is it you're trying to do? What is it you're trying to accomplish? What is your time frame? And we would go and help them navigate that search so that they could filter out the things and you know, help interpret the language for them. And if it said, you know, by nomination only, we would just keep pushing it, because if they didn't have any even secondary or third tertiary network connection, like, you know, it's almost like the six degrees of separation. If they didn't have any degree of connection, it wasn't probably going to be a viable option. So, you know, it's a harsh reality that this type of exclusivity still exists within the philanthropic infrastructure, but it does. And so that, you know, they probably won't call you back if you call to ask about it, because I think that's what they're trying to convey in a very neutral way.
I will just say, as a director of grants who has nomination-based funding that I oversee, a lot of the funding that is nomination-based is to do with a particular type of artist that we're looking to award. So they're usually of, you know, a particular type of discipline or age group or location. And so when we reach out for nominating partners, it's about targeting specific people within the industry that are connected through those particular avenues. So just as a little insight into the way that nomination might work for funds that you might see on the NIFA grants page, it's about targeted specific areas. But to Heather's point, don't, you know, we pride ourselves on customer service. So, you know, do email, do ask about the way that goes about, because there are, you know, there might be a specific time or a specific area that is that correlates with that particular grant. So do reach out, do ask the questions. And I think that's a good, motto for anything, is that if you are curious, to reach out, do ask questions, and hopefully most people will get back to you.
Hey, thanks. So, somewhat related question. A couple of people in the chat have been asking this. As an individual artist, I feel there is no specific or direct way to find opportunities to seek grants or funding. Can we have specifics for individuals as to what we can do or where we can research to achieve these funds?
So one thing that I often tell artists who come to me and it's like, how do I know about grants? Like, how will I know that they're coming? And I give them two bits of advice. One, I would recommend setting up an email address where you can sign up to a whole bunch of newsletters that isn't one of your, not your, main email address, because you will get bombarded and it will be really hard to filter out what you need to look at. And then you really need to dedicate time. And so having a spreadsheet, a lot of funds, the ones that we have, we mention if they're on a yearly basis or on a, a bi-monthly basis or whatever it might be. So, keeping an active calendar, and I know that sounds really, in some ways very basic, but it's about being active and being, subscribing to those newsletters, being aware of what it is that you're looking to fund. So if you have a project that you're looking to fund, being really proactive about finding other projects that are similar and seeing who funded them. Looking at those kind of credit lines in projects or other artists, because that will help you kind of broaden your understanding of who's out there and who's funding, in places that you might not think as well. And obviously Candid is a really great resource for finding those funds that you might not realize, but big corporate organizations, it's not just the arts organizations at a local, state or federal level that give funding out. There's a lot of other things that might not be what you think or think of when you think of funding.
So I would say first and foremost, are you connected with your local organizations that support artists? And so whether that be an arts council or a nonprofit, generally, they're going to be the first source that you should be going to, because they know what's going on in the community. If it's national, then you need to look at the places like NIFA and others who are making sure that resources and opportunities that are national are posted. I would say that websites are not necessarily where you're going to find that information unless it's that organization doing the grant program. It's often in social media or in their newsletters. So as Gabriela said, you do have to sign up for the newsletters and glance through them to see what there is. But it's very much organizations that see other opportunities will pass them on, but usually now through social media.
Mm-hmm. I'm just going to say ditto.
Great. And also, since there's a lot of things that are a little different this year than they have been, to say the least, are you noticing with how funding decisions are being made, are funders choosing their grantees or projects any differently now than they have been in the past? And are they making funding decisions any differently now, and are requirements from applicants changing at all compared to in past years?
Well, that's a loaded question. That's a lot of, there's a lot of details in that one question to give. So I'm not going to speak for the field as a whole. I can speak for myself and my organization. We have cut down our grant application process to as minimal as we can. Now, we don't fund individual artists, but even from an organization level, we have tried to minimize the questions and the work. We also have completely shifted how we ask for follow-ups and information to the point of a phone call and an update is all we need now. We don't need a whole process of paperwork to be submitted. That's the last thing that everyone should have to be focused on right now, is typing paragraphs of information out. So we've really tried to shift and think differently around how we get information and what we actually need as a funder. I have heard through some conversations there is that talk, but I'm not sure where everyone else is at in terms of what they're asking for folks to do. the field as a whole is definitely more focused on equity right now, and collective equity. So thinking about who they're funding, how are they funding, what are they doing, are they thinking about rural locations if they're a larger statewide or national grant, is there diversity in the support they're funding, however local or national it is. So that has definitely shifted more in the past year. The arts community had definitely had been on a path for this. There's talk, it's been in conversation, and there's still more work to be done. But there is progress being made, I think, in terms of thinking holistically about who is being supported, who is in the community, and how are artists part of that. So I think those shifts are being made. And I think we're still very much in a learning phase because in a lot of cases right now, timing wise, we're just reaching this kind of cycling time of a new round of support, right? So during COVID was when a lot of applications were already in and processes had happened. So the question is, in a lot of ways, is like, what's coming? And we don't know exactly what a lot of that's going to look like.
Hey, Ruby or Gabriella, anything to add on this?
No, I think, what Heather said is true, and I can't speak for the field, but a lot of what Heather was saying is something, that resonates a lot with the way that we're constructing our application forms. We've always kind of tried to do less because we don't want to make particularly for first-time applicants, you don't want to make the process too overwhelming. But what we've noticed now, particularly at this time during our emergency grants, at the peak of the emergency grants, is that a lot of people are displaced in some way. So, they're either not able to access their studio, or they're, not at their home where they have documentation and things like that. So, during emergency grants, when we're at the peak of having multiple emergency grants open, there was a time where we needed to shift what we were asking for because we were listening to what artists were saying, and, things really changed. And so we weren't able to run things the way that we traditionally would. The good thing about that is that, it's obviously allowed us to change the way that we run our regular cycle of grants. And as we move forward, thinking more about being transparent in the processes, and making sure that there's information on our website that people are able to both see it there or download it, or having information sessions that really dive deep into what we're looking for and what you should be supplying and what you don't need to supply as well. Yeah, so I think that things will change and evolve, and I think that this has been quite like it's like been a pressure pot of like, what has happened, and it's kind of condensed, things that may have happened over several years have happened in a very short period of time. And so there's an adjustment period that needs to happen. But I think most of it is about focusing on what we really need and just making it as clean and as simple as possible.
Tracy, I know you're leaning forward with the next question, but can I just for a second jump into one of the comments that Nick made about CARES funding and being denied? Mm-hmm. And I think that's a moment we're also in right now of learning is if you've been denied, reach out to your state legislature, to your state arts agency if you have one. Nick is in Connecticut. We have a great state art agency here, and I'm sure that they would have a conversation with you about some of it. In some cases, we found that those denials are because of some tweak that had to be made within some piece of the funding that bank or whoever in the conversation didn't think about as an artist what that meant. But also, the more information they hear about what's not working, the more it can be changed and tooled as we go forward. And so, I know a number of states arts agencies currently are working on tweaking because there is still some CARES money from the past round that is not being allocated in a way that artists have access to it, that they're working on doing some twists on it. So make sure your people in power know that you're still looking, you weren't able to get, and there's a demand and need for it, because unless they hear that, they're not thinking that there's an urgency or a reason to focus that way. So I say never end with just the no. Wait and see if there's another way to learn or influence someone in that piece. So.
Great. Kind of related to that vein, a question from the chat. Grants are very competitive, obviously. How do you deal with the disappointment and loss that comes with developing a proposal and then not winning a grant?
We're all looking at each other because we all have knowledge in
I'm
this
like,
area.
So jump in
I
fastest.
had a slide at one point in my life.
Yeah, I think that, you know, being on both ends as like a grantee applying and getting denied, and then obviously being on the other end of unfortunately not being able to fund all of the artists that come through. You know, one thing that I would say is that writing applications is a skill in itself. So if there is an opportunity for you to attend an information session, do it. If there's an opportunity for you to ring and ask for feedback, ask for feedback. You know, what we do for our NISC for Artist Fellowship is that we usually do a blog post about that sums up, you know, some general issues that we saw across all of our, you know, applications. Read those and become, you know, and then reference your application and have a look if there's anything there. You know, take the time to really access the resources that are out there, and, you know, don't be discouraged by not getting a fund. I think a lot of people, you know, particularly if you're new to applying for grants, you know, get discouraged in that first few, but it really also is, you know, in some ways a numbers game. Like it is, so you need to really be applying for everything. And that's why I mentioned, you know, keeping a spreadsheet and being abreast of like when things open and when things close, so that you can have your application in there, and don't, you know, wait until the last day or the last hour to apply. Give yourself enough time to craft the best application that puts the best foot forward. And reach out, and the earlier you start that application, the more time that someone like myself can help you in applying. So if you can get to me, you know, within the, you know, with a few weeks to go, a month to go, I can, before the deadline, I can help you, I can give you advice. But when you email me an hour before it closes, I can't deal with, you know, we can't deal with that load. And so really being prepared, and learning from your mistakes, you know, because that's the only real way to kind of push forward.
Yeah, I love that you bring that forward, Gabriella, because I remember when I was working in Columbus, I mean, we would do a line by line draft review for folks, and go in and be like, okay, you need to strengthen this, you need to restate that, you need to fix this in your budget. And so really taking advantage of the resources that are available before you apply. The one thing that I also want to remind folks too is that your grant officer, your grant, you know, administrator is not the enemy. And always take a deep breath when you get the rejection letter before you fire off emails. You know, because you're probably not the only person that they had to say no to. And so taking a deep breath, understanding that they're not rejecting you, that it is just a matter of review and process, and that it isn't a judgment on your project or your proposal, or the quality of your work. You know, sometimes it's just the way that we tell the story. And so I think also, you know, participating in trainings to understand the grant process. Get in early, get in even before an application opens and have a conversation. I used to meet with artists, you know, regularly, who were like, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? Do you think it's a good, where do you think I fit? Are there other places I might go? And I used to love those prospect, you know, kind of development meetings, because it was exciting to hear what was happening and what the art community was thinking about. And then, you know, even now, a lot of the work that we do is about connecting individuals and organizations to resources. And so, you know, there's nothing more fun than making a connection and then watching that activate and come to fruition. So, you know, even if you're not getting the feedback or the outcome that you want with a certain funder, you know, sometimes maybe they know somebody else who might be a better fit. Invite that conversation with them if you don't get it. Invite the feedback on your proposal, and you know, just kind of keep going. But I think, you know, take it for the rejection of the paperwork, not of you as a person. And I think sometimes that makes it a little easier to keep going.
So I also have always recommended that artists find a buddy, a friend, a mentor, someone that they trust their opinion of and that is willing to tell them honestly what they think and have them read the final draft long before it's submitted. So, and if that person especially has the criterion, which should be public, what is the grant funding? And it may not say, here's our criteria, 1, 2, 3, 4, but if you read the paragraph about what the grant is, you can generally figure out what they're looking for and have someone read it with that lens, right? So that's one piece, and get that honest feedback before it even gets submitted. But also, in many cases, it is fine to reach out to the funder to get a little more context on the panel. Who are they? Are they community members? Are they experts in the field? Who are you talking to? And who will be reading it? And so, from my past work at an arts council, we'd be really clear that, who's reading these are community members who don't have discipline specific knowledge, who are looking to see how this would impact our local community and are probably reading your proposal at 11 o'clock in bed, because that's probably the window they have to look at them. So, be to the point, be clear, and don't use jargon, don't use words they may not understand. So understanding those pieces help you be able to write a better proposal. It doesn't help with the question of being declined, but it does give you that context for how you could actually, get to a point that it's a solid application.
This actually meshes really well with what we teach at Candid's proposal writing classes for nonprofits, where we'll often tell people that even if you've done everything perfectly right, there's maybe like a 1 in 3 chance that you'll get a grant, even if you've done absolutely everything right. And I would guess that number is less favorable if you're competing for arts funding, which is probably even harder. And that even though it is incredibly challenging not to, it's best to try not to take it personally and not to burn your bridges just because it's a small world in this area for funding, and to realize that in so many cases it's not personal. So much of the time there just wasn't enough funding to go around. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't like your work. There just isn't enough funding to go around, or maybe even though they do like what you're doing, it's not a perfect match for what they're looking to fund right now. But those were really good tips, Heather, on what a proposal should look like in a perfect world. You have something to add?
Yeah, so I'm just reading Elizabeth's comment right now about that, and that there is a number who say, there's just too many, we cannot provide feedback. What I have seen work with folks is giving a time gap window. And because essentially they don't want 500 artists to suddenly call them and ask for feedback, but to give a window of that, and then reach out, and often in a lens of, I know you weren't able to fund me, but I'm applying somewhere else, and I'd love to see if I can strengthen that application elsewhere, because funders really love to help you be able to get money from other funders. So I think it's about the lens that you put on it and support for that employee that's having to go through grants to understand that generally that's about the fact it's way too many at the moment they announce the numbers.
Great. And I also see a really good comment in the chat here that I think would serve as good advice for anybody. Donna writes that she's written many grants, that it helps to take your emotion out of it, be professional, and build the strongest case as to why you do what you do and why you should be funded. I know I often say pretend that you're a business writing to potential investors so that they have a sense of why they should invest in you. And I know it's hard to put yourself in that mindset if you're making creative work, to think of it in a business style way. But if you can put yourself in the funder's shoes and give them a good case of why this work, why here, why now, that may help you quite a bit.
Yeah. I'll just quickly say, sorry, Tracy, that's definitely true. Think about, you use the analogy of, thinking about a business pitch. I say to people, it's like applying for a job. Like, you need to sell your project. And like, to Heather's point, really look at the guidelines and look at what they're actually funding and making sure that your project resonates with those particular things. In the same way as when you're applying for a job, you look at the mission statement or the website of the company that you're applying for, and you want to try and hit those particular things within your cover letter. Another thing I would say is answer the question directly. So, you know, with that question asked, you don't spend 2 or 3 sentences building up to your answer to that question. Hit the ground running, because like Heather said, you know, panelists might, who knows where they are when they're reading your application, who knows how many they've read before they get to yours. And the quicker you can get to your point in the more succinct and easy language to understand, the better your application is going to read and resonate.
Great. And I know we are starting to run closer to the end of our time as we're starting to wind down. So here's a tough thing to think about, given that none of us really knows what the future holds. But this year has obviously been challenging. Do any of you have thoughts or predictions on what next year might look like for artists' ability to do their work, and what arts funding might look like next year?
We're all looking at each other because no one wants to be the first one to share this. So I go then because I'm talking. The future currently in the granting world does not look bright. And a big part of that is because a lot of funders rely on allocations through tax allocation, through pass-through in a variety of different ways, through businesses, sponsorships, and supports of that organization's work that becomes grants out. And we all know that all those things are very stretched right now. So what's going to come in the next year is a huge number of questions around grants and what's going to be out there. So my biggest encouragement for everyone is to keep applying for the grants that are there, but think about other ways that funding, you could find funds to do your work and not rely on grant dollars to do projects. So I can share more than that in a minute, but that's my general statement to next year.
I think the one that stands out for me is the idea of mutual aid and collaboration and the village mentality. I think we are going to find ourselves significantly past the point of individualism and every person for themselves. I think we're moving and going to have to move into a phase of understanding that we're stronger together, because there will not be, again, doom and gloom. There won't be enough. I mean, you know, we're going to come to the other side of this. No amount of money is going to save what's happening to us. So the only folks that we can rely on is ourselves and our networks. And I think I think of it as stone soup. What does everybody bring to the party? And eventually we have something to share. So if we think about that in the way that we're constructing our exhibitions, our work, our projects, our programs, you know, is that going to change the way that we think about them if we start thinking about that today instead of waiting 6 more months and then we're in moments of desperation? So I want to drop that.
I have no, crystal ball into the future. And so I can't, I think to both what Heather and Ruby were just saying, I think that collaboration is really important at this time. Just, to connect with people who are, working in the same realm is really important. And yes, there probably won't, there's not enough funding. There was never enough funding to support all artists. And so I think, I don't want to be, I think that there should still be some optimism, but no crystal ball on this end either. But, keep abreast of opportunities and, look for opportunities where you might not think that they would be. And, partnering with organizations, if you have a project, who are the best partners? And thinking about funding, which might not be directly to artists or individuals together, but through organizations, as Heather mentioned earlier in the piece.
So I would also add on what Gabriela just said is, you know, looking for funding that's outside of the arts. And so one I'm going to post in the chat here that potentially only Nick on the call could look at is a program in Connecticut called Sustainable CT. And there's a community match fund where it's about projects in the community where you do a crowdfunding campaign and it's one-to-one matched by foundations. Emily Hall Tremaine Foundation is one of the funders of that. But there are some others in the country. There's a whole network of sustainable states and folks who are thinking about how community and the arts are really important in us getting back to being connected to each other in person and together. So I think thinking about the arts as a way to convene and gather people, and how does your project potentially align with that, especially as there may be funding that starts to become available now that is a 6-month window before you find out, or is there, you know, 6 months we're going to be in a very different place. Hopefully not more isolated in our homes, but more together and around each other. And so if there's a grant program that you could see the future of us all coming back together in your art helping that happen, it's a whole different lens to put on that than it is directly about your artwork that you're doing right now.
Thank you all. It sounds like there's some common threads coming through that can give people takeaways of what to think about when it comes to sustaining their own chances at a creative future. Like, it seems everyone is in agreement on the importance of collaboration, partnerships, the strength of your network. You can't do this alone, and that you'll have a much stronger chance at a future if you lean on your partners and your networks and try to build those up. And also that idea about looking to diversify your financial resources as much as possible and try not to be solely reliant on just arts grants. Arts grants are great when you can get them, but finding other sources of revenue and also looking for grants beyond just the arts will probably be something to remember. There are many, many, many thousands of funders available out there. So think about, what does your creative work intersect with in terms of other fields? Can you pursue some of those other funders that deal with other angles of the work that you do and the reasons why you do that work that you do? Can you make a case for that funding as well? And I'd love to highlight something I see Kit in the audience mention. The Ford Foundation and the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation are both launching major programs right now at achieving greater equity and inclusion in arts funding. Both a couple of the largest funders that are out there in the world, and to explore things like that, to find new initiatives that are taking place in the arts. I see now we are running close to the end of our time here. Any of you have any closing words before we start to finish up for today? Words of wisdom that you want everyone to remember forever?
Read the guidelines. Yeah.
So I would also say you're not alone. There is artists and individuals all across the country who are struggling in similar ways, and find a network, find friends, find people you can talk to. Self-care right now is really important. It is okay if you're not making work right now. A lot of artists are not. Don't put pressure on yourself that you don't need to. This is a time that we need to focus on ourselves and getting through and doing what you need. And if a grant program isn't right for you, don't force it just for attempting to get funds, because you may find that you're actually putting more dollars and energy in it than what you're getting out of it.
I'll also say this, thank you, because artists in this moment have been so generous of spirit and treasure, if you will, and have given so much to communities around the country as we all try to stay sane. And so thank you. And remember that your work has value. And while we're in a moment of giving it all away, make sure that you also remind folks that, you know, it has value and is worth paying for as well. And in your generosity, please don't shoot yourself in the foot and forget to ask for a fee or ask for compensation for the work that you're doing as well, because I think that is also going to be really important on the other side of this.
One more time, here are our panelists today. I'm Tracy, your moderator today. We have Ruby Lopez Harper at Americans for the Arts, Gabriella Calandro at New York Foundation for the Arts, and we have Heather Pontonio at the Emily Hall Tremaine Foundation. Thank you to all of our panelists today for your great advice, great information, and optimism for the future. If you want to let us know how you thought today's session went today, your feedback is very, very helpful for us. So if you follow that link, you'll be able to fill out a quick feedback survey, and that would be really wonderful if you could take a moment to do that. Thank you again to everybody. Sign up for our newsletter if you want to keep up to date with other trainings coming up here in the future at Candid. Join us for more Arts Month programming. We've got more of these sessions coming up. Thank you all for joining us today. Good luck in your arts funding quest and your creative pursuits. And thank you again to Gabriella, Heather, and Ruby for your wonderful, wonderful insights and information today. Thank you again, and good luck, everyone.